Live from NVIT, Q101 presents the 2017 BC General Election Fraser-Nicola Candidates Roundtable Forum, moderated by Jamie Ballum.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Q101 2017 Fraser-Nicola Candidate Roundtable. It's time for the question portion of the afternoon. We solicited questions from our listeners. They sent us a whole bunch, too many in fact, and we've narrowed them down here. We're going to try to get through as many as we can. Each candidate's going to get 1 minute to answer each question, and they've been asked to be as concise as possible so we can hear about a whole bunch of different range of subjects. We've determined the order. It's going to change for every single question. We're starting with the first question. I'm going to go to my left to BC NDP candidate Harry Lally. Harry, what's the number one issue you're hearing from people on the campaign trail?
Well, thank you. I actually kind of started with that in my opening comment, and that is people are sick and tired of the corruption that is going on with the Liberal government, how they take money in one hand for campaign donations, and those very same people are being rewarded with contracts, many of them not even being tendered. People don't trust the BC Liberals, so they want a change in government. They feel that 16 years of one-party rule is far too long, and people are ready for a change, and they're ready for a John Horgan and an NDP government. Specifically, you know, in this riding, economy and jobs is the number one issue. And we've seen that when I was MLA, I took on Weyerhaeuser to protect 100 jobs here. I took on a union boss actually in Boston Bar to make sure 300 jobs were well and alive there. Talco shuts down its mill, and my opponent, the Liberal candidate, was completely silent and actually acquiesced in the decision to have 450,000 cubic meters of your wood go to the Premier's riding, and not a word came out of of defense in defense of the workers. So economy and jobs are number one, and we're going to make sure that raw logs stay in BC for BC workers to produce British Columbia jobs.
Thank you, Harry. BC Green Party candidate Arthur Green, same question.
Thanks, Jamie. The number one issue that I've been hearing is that people are tired of hearing of the same old ideas over and over again. There are no new ideas coming from either the Liberals or the NDP. I believe that this is because of patronage through political donations. The Liberals and the NDP are committed to looking out for their corporate and union donors first. Keeping those corporate interests first and union interests first, not allowing newer ideas come to the forefront that may hinder those donors' donations. This just creates the same old, and that's what most people I've talked to are tired of. Thank you.
BC Social Credit Party candidate Michael Henschel.
Thanks, Jamie. I think one of the primary issues that I'm seeing in the area is the citizens of the Fraser-Nicola having harder and harder time to make ends meet. At the end of the day, we've had a history of tax and spend governments that have not been looking out for the best interests of citizens. We have inflationary spending. We're seeing inflation in housing, inflation in food, fuel, in our hydro bills. At the end of the day, I'm looking at, in my discussions with some fixed income people, I work in the property management sector, and people, like I've talked to seniors recently, and they can't afford, they've been displaced. Their rent was $600 a month. They're looking for a new residence, and they can't find a place for even $900 a month. So housing is a big issue, inflation, making ends meet, and I'm really concerned about the citizens of this area. Thank you.
BC Liberal Party candidate Jackie Taggart, what are you hearing on the campaign trail?
I'm hearing the number one priority is healthcare and doctors. So I want to share with you that we are increasing the training spaces for doctors from 128 to 288. We are placing 100 nurse practitioners in the province. We are looking at the scope of practice to ensure that we are using pharmacists, paramedics, our nurses and our doctors to the fullest extent. We will fund the expansion of the Merritt Hospital emergency room. And I'm hearing from people that healthcare is the top priority and they want that care local.
Thank you, Jackie. On that note, starting with BC Green Party candidate Arthur Green, doctor shortages have affected every community in the region. What can be done differently to ensure residents have access to the services they need?
Thanks, Jamie. We believe that the biggest reason for doctor shortages is the actual availability and supply of them. The doctors we do have, generally, but not always, would prefer to practice in the major centers or even south of the border where they can make a far more lucrative living. Our plan is to increase the supply of doctors by offering them the incentive to stay and practice in BC. We would do this by offering them free education and training in exchange for a time commitment for them to practice in BC. We believe this would increase the supply of doctors, making it more competitive to stay in the larger urban centers and creating more opportunity to fill practices in rural BC. There is also a drastic shortage of nurses, of which we would train more, filling this gap as well. There are actually hospital wings shut down in the province because of nurse shortages. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Henshaw.
Well, rural communities throughout the province are struggling with proper health care funding, sufficient facilities, and front-end staff. My discussions with nurses, doctors, and the health authorities, it's unanimous that there is a lot of waste in the actual administration in the health authorities, where we need to actually look at the bloated bureaucracy. Government needs to sit down, do an forensic audit of the healthcare system, look for the inefficiencies, look for the bloated bureaucracies, the duplications, and cut the fat. And government's just not doing their job to actually look at this as a business, look at where money needs to go to the front-end staff, the nurses, the doctors, and the facilities. We have a hospital here in Merritt that needs a trauma facility, and it's completely underfunded. And the money's there in this province, but the allocation is wrong, and it's just very top-heavy. Thank you.
Candidate Taggart.
41 cents out of every dollar collected in British Columbia is spent on health care. Doctor shortage in rural BC is a real issue. Doctor shortages in many of our bigger centers are an issue. What we've done is taken some of those training seats and moved them out to Kelowna, Prince George, and Victoria, because we know where doctors train, they tend to stay. Of the 6 residency doctors in Kamloops graduating this year, 6 are staying in the region. Of the 7 next year, 4 have already committed to stay in the region. So we're looking at strategies that will entice doctors to stay in rural BC and provide service to our rural communities.
And finally, Candidate Lally.
Thank you very much. Let's go back and figure out why the problem exists. First, the Liberals gave billions of dollars in tax breaks to the largest corporations, have found a hole in a big deficit, so they made massive cuts to health care, and we're feeling the effects of that here in our communities. It is a fact, I've been told by doctors in Fraser-Nicola, there are fewer doctors today in Fraser-Nicola than the day I left office in 2013. A fact, doctors have been known to be turned away by the IHA recruiter. My nephew, you all read about it in the Merritt Herald. Mike Petrina, good friend of mine, a couple years younger than me, graduated from Merritt Secondary, married a gal from Brazil, wanted to come here. The IHA recruiter said, well, why don't you go to Saskatchewan? She's practicing in Ontario right now. If I had my way, I would fire most of the bean counters and the PR personnel at the IHA, use the savings to put into healthcare in our region. Action, not words, speak louder. And I think we have to provide more than just words. We have to give incentives for doctors to come here, remove the red tape for foreign-trained doctors to practice in BC, increase the number of seats in our universities to make sure that we get the doctors into rural BC. And we'll put up urgent care centers, which John Horgan's announced, in communities where they're needed so that we can have 24/7 health care in communities when and where we need it, and restore the ambulance service in rural BC again.
Moving on, next question, starting with BC Social Credit Party candidate Michael Henshaw. Merritt's a prime example. We had a big fire not too long ago that displaced nearly 60 people. Affordable housing is an issue in the region, both for the working class and seniors specifically. What can be done to address the need?
Thanks, Jamie. I think that the best way to deal with housing issues is to increase inventory. We need to assess regulatory guidelines, need to find tax breaks to the private sector, and there needs to be a working with municipalities for zoning alterations. The answer is not to socialize housing. However, I'm not opposed to co-op housing. There has been some success where it puts the onus on the individual that will be in that co-op housing rather than putting that onto the government's back and eventually to the taxpayer. So I'm not opposed to that. It needs to be considered. But I think the best way is to increase your housing inventory. I'm talking with those in the construction industry. Excessive regulation has increased the cost of building a house by up to 15%. If we look back into the 70s, and many of us lived in BC boxes, they were good, solid homes. They're still excellent homes today. You change a roof, or you change some windows, and they're still solid homes. So I think we need to, the cost of building a house has gone way up, and we need to relook that in all aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Taggart.
Well, in British Columbia, we spent $920 million for new affordable units in 1 year. We recognize that housing affordability is an issue, and we are working with municipalities and groups within communities to look at the housing needs and to see how we can solve them. Here in Merritt, we have a 30-unit affordable housing project with ASK that will begin to start to address that need. But there is no doubt that there is more work to be done. We have committed dollars in our platform, and we will continue to do that work.
Candidate Lally.
Thank you. Well, the Liberals gutted the old social credit policy, which the NDP continued and improved, called Homes BC, of building affordable housing, and the Liberals brought in rent subsidies actually to reward their developer friends who gave millions to the Liberal Party. As MLA, I was responsible for getting funding for the 24-unit Three Eagles just down here, affordable housing in Merritt, and sheltered housing in Princeton and Hope, and also Lillooet and other places. The housing mess has actually been created by the BC Liberals because they're bought and paid for with $4.7 million from developers last year. The NDP plan calls for building 114,000 units over 10 years in communities where they're needed. We will work with all levels of government, First Nations, and the not-for-profit and private sectors to secure land and buildings as they're needed. And also to work with, in partnership over 10 years for building a mix of housing for students, singles, seniors, families, and will range from supportive social housing to quality market rental housing.
And finally, Candidate Green.
Thanks. Affordable housing has become a major issue throughout the riding. In fact, we have a record number of homeless people. A lot of this pressure has been created from the overflow effect of Metro Vancouver and its extreme investor-motivated housing market. A lot of this pressure has been created by the foreign investor market and Asians looking to park their finances away from totalitarian Asian regimes, causing competition and inflation in our market region. We've set out to double the foreign property purchase tax to 30% and enforce the current capital gains tax on investment properties to include residential purchases of less than 5 years of inhabited residence on upper-end homes. We will also increase the supply of affordable housing, including Housing First, subsidized housing, and low-cost housing. We believe these measures will slightly cool the market, creating a slight downward trend while offering a roof over the heads of our lower-income residences. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final question before we take a break, starting with BC Liberal Party candidate Jackie Taggart. Are the needs of students sufficiently being met in the riding? If yes, how? If no, what's needed?
Well, education is near and dear to my heart, serving as a school trustee for 17 years. And I'm very pleased that recently grade 10 students in British Columbia ranked number 1 in the world for reading, number 2 in science, and 6th in math. We are putting $1.4 billion into new and improved schools, and we're going to maintain the $9 million investment in the Rural Education Enhancement Fund. And we have committed to look at and undertake a full educational review of our funding formulas. $5 million over the next 2 years to fund teacher retention programs in rural schools and student-teacher loan forgiveness programs for rural school districts. We know that sometimes our rural school districts are challenged to have teachers come into their districts, and so we're looking at every way we can support them in attracting teachers.
Candidate Lally.
Thank you. The needs of our students are not being met. And some of the stuff that my Liberal opponent read out, Christy Clark was brought in kicking and screaming after she lost a court case to actually restore some of that funding. That is no guarantee that she's going to keep it there after the election. And that's why you need an NDP government to make sure that that court decision is going to be carried out. The Liberals made massive cuts to education funding. They cut ESL, special needs, Aboriginal education, cuts to librarians, counselors, and programs. The very disadvantaged students who needed the help the most, they cut it. Closed 278 schools, the largest number of school closures right here in Fraser-Nicola, Yale, Lillooet. An NDP government will restore funding to classrooms, hire more teachers, and reduce class size, reinstate the funding to ESL, Aboriginal Ed, and special needs, and government needs to start respecting teachers, students, and parents again, rather than picking fights with them to gain political advantage.
Candidate Green.
Thanks, Jamie. We believe education starts at birth and ends when you die. In order to fill the needs of the future, it's imperative that we lead in innovation. Though some advances have been met in coding and technological education, but far more has to be done. If we have the opportunity to form government, we will increase education spending by $2.1 billion over the next 4 years, on top of the $300 million awarded by the courts for class size modification, which is being neglected by the current Liberal government. Currently, the average student academic and technical education requirements, especially for the future, are not being met. Education is the major plank in our platform, and we believe it will be necessary to give our future generation the ground floor opportunities for us to lead the way in technological prosperity. Thank you.
And finally, Candidate Henshaw.
Thank you. Education is the future of our province. I'm a certified ESL teacher, and I grew up in a family of educators. The Liberal government has gutted the Ministry of Education, broke collective agreements with teachers, and shut down many schools in our province. We need to run the Ministry of Education as a business fiscally, but with a social conscience, considering what's best for all parties involved, that's students, parents, and educators. There needs to be a forensic audit, again, of every aspect of the ministry, and we need to find what is lacking and provide suitable funding.